I'm moving forward every day, Jesus. I just let him lead the way every second, every minute, every hour of the day. I'm moving with Jesus every day, 24/7. With Jesus every day, 24/7. With Jesus, I'm moving with Jesus every day.
Hello again, dear viewer, and thank you for joining us as we continue our Wellbeing series by interviewing and hearing from some professionals in their respective fields. As you remember, if you would have joined us before, we launched this series with a word from our dear pastor. Then we would have interviewed two families to see how these families were coping in these times that we are living. Today, as I said, we're going to be looking at hearing from professionals. We have the psychiatrist, we have the pastor, and we have the teacher educator. Let me allow them to introduce themselves to you.
Hello, my name is Angeli Gall. I am a teacher at the secondary school level. Primarily, though, I'm a husband and father of one, and I'm happy to be here today.
Hello to all viewers. I'm Dr. Sandra Reed. I'm a psychiatrist. That's a medical doctor who specializes in mental health disorders. And it is also my pleasure to be here with you.
And then I'm the lone pastor here. Wayne Sampson is my name, and I'm delighted to share this time with this team.
Welcome to all our panelists. We will be talking about today about well-being. And if you would remember, this involves everyone's ability to have that balance or equilibrium when things can go off in life. And we know lately a lot has been going off in life, from the pandemic to financial woes to what is happening on the outskirts, maybe to come in with monkeypox and all of the different things that would threaten that level of balance that we can have. So first off, we're going to start with talking about the dimensions that influence our overall well-being. Now, these dimensions are varying and are many. They include the physical dimension, the psycho-emotional dimension, the social dimension, as well as the spiritual. So, based on your professional experience as a pastor, as a psychiatrist, as a teacher educator, would you say that there's one dimension that is most important in thinking about well-being? And what would that be? Anybody, feel free to jump in.
I didn't want to be the first one to answer that one because I know that my response can be a very biased one, of course. Because I'm a strong believer. I know that the dignity and the purpose of one's life finds its meaning in the spiritual realm. To me, all the other things, all the other areas of life uh, bring out the benefits when it is related to from a spiritual perspective. So I see the spiritual perspective having the edge amidst the others.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Pastor Sampson might be surprised that I would actually agree with him.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, I bring a different perspective to it, a different twist. And this is really how I see it. Our healing, our mental health, our well-being is grounded in the spiritual.
Yes.
It is God who is the ultimate healer. However, as we go through this life of sin and we experience all of the insults to our well-being, it sometimes becomes important for people to be able to function. And that is where the other perspectives come in. So we have the physical, the mental, the social, the cultural, and we can fix these things enough for people to be able to function and have a good quality of life. But the ultimate healing, and if one might say the best approach to any form of trauma, mental health issue is the spiritual.
And well, I'd like to add to that, or to say it in a little bit of a different way. Remembering back to the Bible, I feel as if Jesus took an approach to get to the spiritual via the physical and the social and the psychological. So he would approach people in such a way that he would try to reach out to their, well, we say felt needs, or like, how are you? How do you feel? On his way toward the spiritual. So I would agree with you all as well.
Okay, so we agree that all of the dimensions are basically important, but the spiritual has that edge in terms of one's wholeness. So let's move. Dr. Reed,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to piggyback a little bit on Mr. Legol, because we've acknowledged that all are important and the spiritual has the edge. But when we interact with an individual, sometimes it's important to identify what is, and the term felt need, what is their immediate felt need. And whatever that is, be it social, be it physical, be it spiritual, that becomes the most important at the time, because you have to address that before you can look at the others.
Yes.
So.
Let's talk a little bit about your interactions with individuals in your line of work. So, how do you think people are coping right now? What do you think their overall experience is like when you interact with students, Mr. Legal, with your patients, and with persons as a pastor, Pastor Sampson? What do you get from people in terms of how they are doing right now?
From in my pastor and shepherding approach to things, the emotional experiences are different. There are several individuals who present a kind of daunted spirit about life, not feeling a sense of empowerment to deal with the issues that are there. There are those who are wrapped up with worries, for sure, and not knowing what next and how to deal with. Some persons are literally afraid, and there are some folks that I've also discovered who feel guilty, and that one may be a little bit strange, but they feel guilty. Why? Because they may have had resources that they could have saved for the rainy day and did not. And here comes the rain, and I'm getting wet, and those around me are being soaked. It's my fault. So you have a number of different emotional spill-offs from this experience, for sure. And again, I find it necessary to point out to each of those individuals, whether the daunted ones, the fearful ones, the worried ones, regardless where you are, whatever the struggle might very well be, this transcendent God is very much eminent, and he's able to do what's required.
Okay. So I see those same people, but I see them when the issues are at a more intense crisis, because that's when people would seek the professional help. If I were to use one word, and there are many single words we could use, but the first word that comes to my mind is overwhelm. And that overwhelm preceded the pandemic. People are doing too much, too fast. If we look at how the world was before the pandemic, people are holding down 2 jobs. Single parents are trying to manage on their own. Everybody has to study because now the workplace demands the master's, the PhD. So you're studying, you're working. You're just trying to make ends meet, and it's overwhelming. Now, on the flip side of that, there is little recreation and relaxation.
Okay.
People either don't have the time for it, or they don't make the time for it.
Okay.
Thank God for the Sabbath. Because were it not for the Sabbath, many of us might have perished emotionally.
They come to
Yeah.
You
spiritual
see,
aspect again.
there's the spiritual
That's
aspect
right.
again, you
Yes.
see, because that Sabbath becomes very important. So on top of that baseline of overwhelm, we now have these crises coming at us one after the other. And permit me to even say that they are intended to generate fear and anxiety.
Ah.
That's how I feel about them.
Right.
Intended to generate fear and anxiety. Whether it's climate change, whether it's COVID, whether it's monkeypox, whether it's war, people are fearful, as you said,
Yes.
Pastor Sampson, and they are afraid and anxious. So what we are seeing is that the world has led people away from God's plan of living more and more and more, further and further and further away. There is more reliance on self. There's less reliance on God, less contact with nature, less ability to cope because the pandemic took away. You couldn't do sports. You couldn't go to the beach,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And what I see is an overwhelming amount of anxiety. Anxious people. Everybody's anxious. Some seek help, some don't, but everybody is anxious. And on top of that, for those who are at risk, we are seeing a lot more serious mental illness. People are becoming ill. Students are becoming, I teach at the university as well. Students are becoming ill. People are becoming ill because of this increased stress and less coping.
Wow.
Okay.
Very sobering indeed. Tell us about your experience with students, Mr. Legal.
Well, the way I like to say it is that people they want to know that their life has meaning and that they matter to somebody. I'll give you a small experience. When I was going to school some time back, teachers would call you by your last name, say Legal, and then the students would call one another by their last names. And when I started teaching, so I would do the same, I got pushback from the students. They would say things like, "No, my name is Sherry. Sorry, that's not my name, sir. My name is Mark or John." So it's almost as if people want to be seen for who they are and to know that you see them. And this is something I've been seeing consistently. Well, we say throughout the pandemic and throughout these times, people want to know that you see me. Sometimes you will speak to a student who you no longer teach. Maybe you taught them at the lower level and they're now in Form 4 or 5, and you speak to them, or you call the name in the hall and they say, "Oh, so you remember me?" So people want to be remembered and known, and so I think that's a big thing.
Okay. Let me direct this question to Dr. Reed. What would you say is the most influential factor or factors? And we're talking about internal factors as well as external factors on a person's well-being.
Okay. All right. So this answer may surprise a little bit. I would actually say childhood. Childhood. Because as a child, your experience shapes who you are, and that includes the development of vulnerabilities, which put you at risk for emotional pain and all kinds of other issues. To me, parenting is so absolutely important because what we want to raise, or who we want to raise, are children who have the experience of unconditional love. And it kind of ties into what Mr. Legal was just saying. You have to know that you are wanted. You have to know that you are loved. You have to know that you are unconditionally accepted. And you have to be protected from trauma. And if a parent is able to do all of that, you find that you develop children who become adults who are better able to cope with life stresses, right? So we want to look at the parenting and childhood experience as important. Now, once you become an adult, I think coping is the watchword that I would use. Because life is stressful. We can't get away from that.
One challenge after another.
One challenge after another. And what we want is to be able to cope with these challenges. And our lesson study quarterly comes right in the crucibles, the crucibles that we experience. And I'm going to kind of hand over to Pastor Samuel because that's where faith and the spiritual are very, very important in handling these crucibles.
Right.
And how real that is, that's definitely is a fact, because persons, I believe in this given time, so we are all searching for a place where safety and security can be had. And that is not just limited to the romantic space. I'm talking about life generally. We want to know that we are safe financially. We want to know that we are safe and secure emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise. And that search is on. And in the skill in so acquiring those, that I am discovering could be many persons are not tooled to do that. And therefore they go into spaces with noble intent or intentions, but not being tooled to deal with it, they experience the worst pain. So I think that's one of the factors that need to be considered. Tooling people. And of course, well, parenting is that major space where that can be done. The life skills that are necessary to deal with the challenges of life. Noting how the Bible puts life. After the cloud comes the rain. That's life, a series of challenges, as it were. And therefore, tooling with life skills, absolutely essential.
Yes, definitely. As a teacher educator, Mr. Legal, do you sometimes have to help students develop these tools to help them to cope? And are they open to learning how to cope?
Well, what I would say is that um, in order for them to develop these tools, they need a space where they belong and not ridiculed. I was talking to a colleague yesterday, actually, and she was explaining that a lot of the times, sometimes as teachers, we notice that children are reluctant to try things, particularly new things. And she was pointing out that this is a generation that grew up on social media. So everything is filmed. And so they have a acute sensitivity towards being laughed at or ridiculed. And that sort of hinders them often, we find, from trying new things or wanting to do new things. They need a lot of coaxing. So I believe that just because you're going to learn as you try, I believe that just trying is the biggest hurdle I see among students. That just getting to that point where they can say, okay, I may fail, but that's okay. I'll try again.
Okay. And that's necessary in life because
Yes.
you won't always succeed the first time you try at something. Let's talk about some specific factors that influence well-being. Let's start with the psychological. So, Dr. Reed, right up your alley. But she's a psychiatrist.
That's right.
How can a person's thoughts and their patterns of thinking affect their well-being, influence their well-being, the thoughts that go through their head?
Okay, all right. So I think we can accept that thoughts experience how we feel and how we feel our emotions. So our thoughts experience our emotions. So, of course, that's going to impact our well-being. I want to give an example, and I'm going to, again, piggyback my example on what Mr. Legault said. If a young person is called to do something, an activity, a task, a test, or whatever it is, and we go back to the parenting, that young person is confident, they know where their worth comes from, right? Pastor Sam's new area there, right? And they are called to do the task. One would expect that their thoughts would simply be, I have a task to do, I'm going to do it, I'm confident, and I do it. If, however, you have somebody who is lacking in confidence, where the social media has said you only have a few likes, whereas everybody gets hundreds of likes, and they are called upon to do a task, think of what thoughts might be in their head. I'm going to mess up. I'm a failure. I wouldn't be as good. And those thoughts influence how they feel. So you have the person who is confident, they have a task, and they feel good and comfortable. And then you have these young people who have all kinds of challenges that interfere with the thoughts in their head. And the thoughts could be thoughts of worry, thoughts of anxiety. They catastrophize, they maximize the worst thing that could happen, all right? They panic, they feel shame. And these thoughts, they may not even be aware of, but they just know how they feel. And that is the genesis of the form of therapy called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, where you can, in fact, help someone to recognize that I feel anxious, I feel sad, I feel hurt because my thoughts are distorted.
Okay.
My thoughts have magnified the trauma or the terror when in fact it's not as I am thinking, right? Now, CBT is Bible-based, I think. I really do believe so, right?
I believe so as well.
Yeah, because God has told us, He has told us, do not be anxious about anything. Do not worry. Do not be troubled. Do not be afraid. All these people have to do is get in touch with your thoughts, the anxious thoughts, the fearful thoughts. And God has told us what to do with them. Now, in CBT, in the world, you are taught relaxation techniques and, those things help the feelings that you experience. But in the Bible, God tells us, he says, cast all your fears upon me. Cast all your anxieties on me. And with prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, that's how you cope. So to be able to cast the fears, you have to identify the thoughts. You take the thoughts, you put it at the foot of the cross, holy CBT.
Yes. Christianity is a blessing
it
indeed.
is.
Pastor Sampson.
There is the struggle one has, not accepting or not coming to the realization that the avenue to my mind, my senses.
Yes.
And many times we allow ourselves to be exposed to touch, taste, smell, hear things that can serve as a reference point that can create the scene that my dear sister has just painted to us. If I'm consistently exposing my mind to the negative, I'm company with persons who are negative, I'm looking at things that are negative, all my senses are being exposed to the negative. That's my sensory data. That's a reference point for my life thereafter. That will create my thoughts. And if my thoughts are derived from that negative source, you could understand then that my feelings will be negative. If my feelings are negative, then my wants will become negative. And I could then act because of that. So I think there's a need for us to guard well the avenue of our minds as we go through it. Yes, there are several things around us screaming at us, but there is a need for us to be somewhat disciplined and preserve our minds. It's good to listen to news, but I've come to understand, even during the pandemic, that to what extent I allow my mind to be fed with the negative could give rise to feelings and such the case. So guarding well, and that's a biblical counselor, things that are lovely, things that are pure, things that are of good report, those are the things to think about. Guard well the avenue of your mind.
Yes, well said. Let's shift a bit and talk about one of the popular words that sort of came out during the pandemic, and that is isolation. A lot of people feel isolated. They feel like they can't connect. And that would have stemmed from the the public health restrictions and all of those things. And now you have people, even with the place opening back, people still, they don't want to come out, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. I want to bring it to the school setting, Mr. Legal. Can you tell us how you see social support, that element of social support from your friends and from your family for students? How does that make a difference in the well-being of young people?
Okay, so I'll give what I've experienced. From the teacher's perspective, right? Even teaching online was a challenge during that time. You'd be teaching sometimes. The younger children would respond to you, but the older children in particular, you'd have to keep coaxing them to respond, to say something, turn your mic on, be engaged. So it was really difficult for them. And so what came across very clearly is the idea that presence is very, very important. As a matter of fact, some of us, in our school setting, some of the teachers, you were in charge of a class, so we would meet on Zoom together, and the children would ask to meet together on Zoom, so that was nice. At different periods during the pandemic, when you could socially distance, you'd have limited opportunity to try to visit students who were particularly vulnerable. But one thing I noticed was that when the children came back out, finally, there was a bit of an apprehension, almost as if they were unsure whether or not the friends that were there online would be the same in person. I think in some cases, some of their communication even sort of fell off. So there was always this kind of hesitance, and as a teacher, you know the students and you're thinking, well, you're good friends before. Why are you so hesitant, But they had a real sort of a pause. So I believe that physical presence is, you can't substitute that. You really
Yeah.
can't substitute.
Definitely. Pastor Samson, let's talk about the spiritual element. And I can't believe we're running out of time already. So we'll end with this this question. So I'd like Pastor Samson to lead, but all of the panelists, please feel free to chime in. What specific elements of spirituality would you say are necessary to improve a person's well-being, young people as well as, everybody?
No, this is a seminar by itself.
That's right.
And I'll start off with two words that I'll need to clarify thereafter. Seeing the transcendent God and relating to the immanent God. A God who is sovereign. A God who is in control of all things, transcendent. But yet is immanent, close, intimately close. And he's able to function in those two spheres simultaneously. And that is our God. Then you ask, well, what kind of God is he? And I see that God have three things about that God that I like to boast about. A God of love, a God who is wise, and a God who is powerful. So, hey, this transcendent God who has love, wisdom, and power want to share that with me in an intimate way. If a person's perspective of God is derived from that, then he or she knows, hey, I am loved by a transcendent God who will want what's best for me. Secondly, this transcendent, immanent God is a wise God. He knows what's best for me. And more than that, he is strong enough to do what's best for me. So whatever situation, whatever crucible I'm going through, this transcendent God is my God. Nothing comes to me that is not filtered through him. And nothing conquers me if he is with me. No, that perspective brings you to a point where I am more than a conqueror.
Okay.
There's a level of sanctified arrogance that comes along with that. I'm okay because this awesome God, transcendent, but yes, immanent. And he's wrapped up with love, wisdom, and power. That's my God wanting to share that with me. Then nothing comes, no crucible comes. And to every crucible that comes, because it's filtered through him, doing one of three things in my life. Spitting out some things that need to be spitted out. Melting some things about me that need to be melted in order for me to be molded for his plan for my life to be had. That perspective really brings a sense of self, well-being, sound mind, no fear to face life and its challenges.
And that definitely is linked to what Dr. Reed was saying previously about your thought pattern. Because if you have that thought and if you have that understanding of God, then of course it's going to influence the way that you see the challenges in life.
That's right.
So Dr. Reed, you want to add to that?
I mean, that's really beautiful, Pastor, really. But I would just add one element, because that God, through his Holy Spirit, also wants to fill us.
That's right.
And that helps in relationship.
Yes.
Because there are so many challenges people encounter in relationships because of this void.
Yes.
People talk about the void, and you seek to fill this void with so many other things that are not healthy, that do not promote wellness. But God is there, ready and able to fill you with his spirit, with his presence. And that brings healing in relationships.
Oh, yes. And that is a beautiful note for us to end this first part on. I can't believe we're out of time already. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I really want you to tune in as we continue the conversation next week on our well-being.